Have you ever noticed how quickly people decide who matters just by looking? The old man didn't rush when he entered the emergency room. He moved slowly, carefully, as if every step had been practiced to conserve strength. His jacket was worn, his hands trembled slightly, and the folder he carried was bent at the edges, as if it had been opened and closed too many times in a life that no one here seemed interested in hearing about. To everyone else in that crowded hospital, he was invisible, before he even spoke. The waiting room buzzed with irritation. Phones rang. Nurses sighed. A doctor glanced at him once, then looked away, already annoyed. When his name was called, mispronounced, rushed, he stood up quietly, thanked the nurse, and followed instructions without question. That alone should have meant something. It didn't. At the triage desk, his pain was minimized. His words were interrupted. When he tried to explain that the pain had started hours ago and was getting worse, the nurse rolled her eyes and told him to wait his turn. Her tone wasn't cruel in an obvious way. It was worse, dismissive, as if he was wasting oxygen by speaking. Around them, people watched. No one said a word. Time passed. Minutes blurred into hours. Younger patients arrived later and were taken in sooner. Every time he gently asked for an update, the response grew colder. A security guard was called, just in case. A doctor joked under his breath about another old guy who Googled his symptoms. Laughter followed. The old man lowered his gaze, nodded once, and returned to his chair. But there was something unsettling about him. He never complained loudly, never raised his voice, never begged. His back stayed straight despite the pain. His eyes remained alert, scanning the room with a calm that didn't belong to someone being humiliated. When the nurse snapped at him again, he whispered something under his breath. Not an apology, not an insult. Just a short sentence, spoken. Like a habit. No one caught it. No one realized that the way he waited wasn't weakness. It was discipline. And as the hospital continued to treat him like a burden, a small, almost invisible detail was about to surface. A detail that would turn this entire emergency room upside down. Keep watching, because what's unfolding here isn't just a hospital story. It's a brutal lesson about respect, judgment, and hidden authority. If you've ever seen someone dismissed, ignored, or humiliated just because they looked weak, you're going to want to see how this ends. Before we go any further, I want you to do something important. Drop a comment right now with the word respect. If you believe no one, especially an elderly man, should be treated like he's disposable, and as you listen, pay attention to the small details. This kind of story rewards the people who truly understand what's happening beneath the surface. The truth doesn't explode all at once. It leaks out through clues, tone, and timing. Also, make sure you hit the like button if you want more emotional justice stories where arrogance gets punished and dignity gets restored. And if you're not subscribed yet, check right now, because these stories are built for people who value honor, discipline, and seeing unfairness corrected in the most satisfying way. Now here's where it gets worse. Because the hospital staff doesn't just ignore him, they make a decision, fast, careless, and humiliating, that pushes this old man from silent endurance into a situation he never should have faced. It started with a simple request, too simple to justify the reaction he got. The old man rose from his chair slowly, one hand pressed against his side as if something inside him was burning. He approached the triage desk again, not demanding, not dramatic, just steady, respectful, quiet. "Ma'am," he said, voice low, "I need to be seen. The pain is getting sharper." The nurse didn't even look up at first. She kept typing, chewing her gum like his words were background noise. When she finally glanced at him, her face tightened with that familiar expression people wear when they think someone is beneath them, annoyance mixed with superiority. "You've already been told to sit down," she snapped, loud enough for the waiting room to hear. "You're not the only one here." A few heads turned. A couple of people smirked. The old man nodded once, like he accepted the rule of the room. But he didn't move away. He stayed there, standing, in pain, because something told him if he sat back down again, he might not get up at all. The nurse leaned back in her chair and raised her voice even more, almost performative now. What is it this time? Chest pain? Dizziness? Another emergency after you waited until midnight? He opened his folder with careful fingers, as if the papers mattered to him in a way they didn't to anyone else. It's not the first time, he said, but it's different tonight. It's... Sir, she cut him off. We are... not doing this. Her eyes flicked to the security guard near the entrance. He's bothering staff again. That word, bothering, hit like a slap. Because the old man wasn't a threat. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't cursing. He was just old. And in that hospital, old meant inconvenient. The security guard stepped closer, already taking sides without hearing a full sentence. You need to sit down, he ordered, chest out, voice proud, like he was controlling a dangerous situation, not shoving an elderly man back into silence. The old man looked at him for a moment. Not scared, not angry, just evaluating. Like he'd seen men like this before. Men who enjoyed power because it was the only thing they had. I'm not trying to cause trouble, the old man said. I'm trying to prevent it. The nurse laughed. A sharp, ugly sound. Prevent trouble? Sir, you're in an emergency room, not a movie. Then she did something that made the room go quiet for a second. She reached across the desk, grabbed the folder from his hands, and flipped through it like it was garbage. Papers slid. A card fell out onto the counter. The nurse picked it up, squinted, and scoffed. Is this supposed to impress me? She said. People print fake stuff all the time. The old man's jaw tightened, not with rage, more like restraint, like he was holding something back. He extended his hand calmly. Please, he said, give it back. But the nurse wasn't done. She turned slightly so others could see, like she wanted, witnesses, like she wanted an audience for his humiliation. Everyone's always special, she announced, smiling at a woman nearby. Everyone's always a hero in their own story. The waiting room gave her what she wanted. Little chuckles, nods, whispered comments. The old man stood there while strangers judged him based on his tired face and shaking hands. And the worst part was the silence. No one defended him. No one said, "That's enough." The room accepted the disrespect like it was normal. The security guard moved closer again, now with his hand hovering near the old man's shoulder. "Last warning," he said. "Sit down or you're out." And that's when the old man spoke again, soft, almost under his breath. Not to the nurse, not to the guard. Almost like he was speaking to someone who wasn't there. A short sentence, calm, controlled. A sentence that sounded less like a plea and more like a code. The nurse didn't hear it. The guard didn't care. The waiting room went back to its noise. But one person, just one, froze when they caught those words. And the look on their face suggested something terrifying. This old man wasn't lost. He wasn't confused. And he definitely wasn't powerless. What happened next wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. And that's exactly what made it dangerous. After the security guard finally forced the old man back into his chair, the staff did what institutions often do when they feel challenged. They doubled down. A note was entered into the system. Short. Careless. The kind of note that quietly follows a patient like a shadow. Uncooperative, disruptive, non-urgent. That single decision changed everything. When his name was called again, it wasn't with urgency. It was with irritation. A young doctor skimmed the screen before even looking at him, already convinced he knew the story. Another elderly patient exaggerating. Another wasted bed. Another problem to manage quickly. The doctor asked questions without waiting for answers, tapped his pen. Checked boxes. When the old man tried to explain that the pain radiated sharply, that it came in waves, that it felt different from anything he'd experienced before, The doctor interrupted him mid-sentence. "You should have come earlier," he said flatly. "We'll give you something for discomfort and see how you respond." No imaging, no proper exam, no listening. A nurse injected medication without explanation. When the old man asked what it was, she sighed and said, "Standard protocol." Her tone suggested the conversation was over. The medication dulled the pain, but it also dulled his ability to speak clearly. His words slowed, his vision blurred slightly, and to the staff, that confirmed their bias. See? Confused, dramatic, just another old man who doesn't know what's going on. Hours passed again. His condition didn't improve. It worsened. His breathing became shallow. Sweat gathered at his temples. He pressed his fingers into the armrest, not to complain, but to stay present. A nurse noticed and rolled her eyes. "He's reacting for attention," she muttered to a colleague. "They always do." What no one realized was that the medication masked symptoms that should have triggered alarms. And because his chart had already labeled him as a problem, no one questioned it. The system protected itself instead of the patient. At one point, the old man's folder was moved, then misplaced, then quietly marked as waiting. A small administrative error, the kind that happens every day. The kind that becomes lethal when combined with arrogance. Through it all, he stayed silent. Not because he was weak, but because he understood something they didn't. He had learned long ago that panic spreads chaos, and chaos helps no one. Discipline meant endurance, control, waiting for the right moment. But the moment was approaching faster than anyone realized. Across the room, a young nurse, new, observant, still uncorrupted by routine, paused as she passed his chair. Something about him didn't match the story in the system, the posture, the calm, the way his eyes tracked movement even while medicated. Her gaze dropped to his wrist, and she stopped walking, because beneath the thin skin and age spots was a faded mark. Not a scar from surgery, not an accident, a deliberate mark. One she had only seen once before, in a training module she almost forgot. Her stomach tightened as she looked back at his chart. And for the first time that night, someone in that hospital began to wonder if they had made a catastrophic mistake. The young nurse tried to keep walking. For half a second, she told herself it was nothing. Coincidence, fatigue, a trick of the light. Hospitals were full of symbols, scars, stories that meant different things to different people. She had a job to do, a schedule to keep, and a system that didn't reward curiosity. But her feet refused to move. She turned back toward the old man, now slumped slightly in the chair, eyes half closed but still alert in a way that felt deliberate, not confused, not sedated into helplessness, just waiting. The mark on his wrist sat there quietly, partially hidden beneath the cuff of his jacket, faded with time but unmistakable once you knew what you were looking at. She had seen it once before, years ago, during a mandatory training session no one else seemed to take seriously. A retired officer had spoken briefly, almost reluctantly, about certain units, certain identifiers that were never meant to be displayed, never meant to be explained, marks that didn't show rank, but history, service that didn't seek recognition, but commanded it. Her pulse quickened. She knelt slightly, pretending to adjust something on the chair beside him, and let her eyes drift to the folder the nurse had tossed back onto his lap earlier. Most of the papers were ordinary, insurance forms, old test results. But one page, folded differently than the rest, caught her attention. Thicker, older, yellowed at the edges. A name was typed across the top. She froze. It wasn't famous. It wasn't something you'd see on television or in history books. That was what made it worse. Because in the military world, the most powerful names were often the quiet ones, the ones spoken carefully, only when necessary. names that opened doors without explanation. She glanced at the chart on the computer, then back at the paper. Same name, slightly different formatting, like someone had copied it without understanding what it represented. Her mouth went dry. "Sir," she said softly, lowering her voice so no one else could hear, "can I ask you something?" The old man opened his eyes fully now, clear, focused. He looked at her the way a superior looks at a subordinate, not with arrogance, but with recognition, as if he knew exactly who she was in this moment. "You already know the answer," he said quietly. That was when she noticed the other detail, the number written near the bottom of the page. Not a phone number, not a patient ID, a unit designation. One that hadn't officially existed for decades. One that, according to everything she'd been taught, didn't leave survivors who talked about it. Her hands began to shake. Across the room, laughter erupted near the triage desk. The same nurse who had mocked him earlier was telling the story again, embellishing it now. The security guard chuckled. The system was still blind, still arrogant. The young nurse stood up slowly and walked toward the staff station. Her face had gone pale, her movements rigid with urgency she didn't dare explain out loud. She picked up the phone. She didn't dial the number listed on the chart. She dialed a number she had never used before. On the second ring, someone answered. No greeting, no pleasantries. She swallowed hard. "I need to confirm a name," she said, "and I need to know what to do if it's real." There was a pause on the line, a long one. Then a voice, suddenly cold and precise, asked her to repeat the name. As she did, the noise of the emergency room seemed to fade. And when the voice on the other end finally spoke again, it said only one thing. "Do not let him leave." At that exact moment, the hospital was still laughing, and it had no idea that everything was about to stop. The nurse slowly lowered the phone, her fingers numb, her heartbeat loud in her ears. Around her, the emergency room continued exactly as before. Monitors beeping, voices overlapping, someone arguing about wait times. No alarms, no announcements. Nothing that suggested a line had just been crossed. But for her, the air felt heavier. She turned back toward the old man. He was exactly where she had left him, hands folded, breathing controlled despite the pain tightening his chest. When their eyes met, he didn't ask what she had heard. He didn't need to. There was a brief nod between them, subtle, mutual, almost formal, like two people acknowledging a shared understanding without words. She hurried to the charge nurse and whispered urgently, pointing discreetly at the name on the chart. The response was immediate dismissal. "You're overreacting," the charge nurse muttered. "We don't escalate based on rumors and paperwork. Focus." Focus. That word again. The same excuse that had justified every act of neglect so far. Minutes later, the doctor who had ordered the medication walked past the old man and shook his head. "He's still here?" he said to no one in particular. "Move him to observation or discharge him." "We need the bed." "Discharge him." The nurse felt a chill run down her spine. She stepped forward, her voice tight. "I wouldn't do that." The doctor laughed lightly. "Since when do we let interns decide protocol?" Before she could respond, the automatic doors at the entrance slid open. At first, no one noticed. Then conversations began to die mid-sentence. Not because someone shouted, but because a presence had entered the room that demanded attention without asking for it. Two men in dark uniforms stepped inside, posture perfect, eyes scanning with precision that didn't belong in a civilian hospital. Behind them walked another figure, older than the others, but taller, straighter, every movement deliberate. The insignia on his coat wasn't flashy, but it was unmistakable to anyone who had ever served. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't rush. He simply asked one question. "Where is he?" the charge nurse stammered. The security guard straightened instinctively. The mocking nurse went, silent, her smile evaporating as her eyes flicked from the insignia to the men flanking him. The doctor stepped forward, suddenly respectful. "Sir, this is a medical facility." The man cut him off with a glance. "I'm not here as a visitor," he said calmly. "I'm here because a mistake was made." He looked directly at the old man across the room. "Colonel," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I apologize for the delay." The word hit the room like a shockwave. Colonel. Every sound stopped. Keyboards froze. A stretcher wheel squeaked once, then fell silent. The old man slowly stood, despite the pain, and returned the nod. "At ease," he said quietly. In that moment, the hospital understood something far too late. The man they had ignored, the man they had mocked, the man they had nearly discharged. He wasn't powerless, and the reckoning was just beginning. The effect was immediate and brutal. The security guard took an unconscious step back, his earlier confidence evaporating as if it had never existed. The nurse who had laughed just minutes ago felt the blood drain from her face, her mouth slightly open, eyes locked on the insignia she suddenly recognized but had never expected to see up close. Even the doctor, moments ago dismissive and smug, straightened his posture, smoothing his coat with nervous hands. This wasn't confusion anymore. This was fear. Controlled, professional fear. The senior officer walked deeper into the emergency room, each step measured, each movement radiating a kind of authority that didn't need volume to be felt. People moved out of his way instinctively, not because they were told to, but because something deep inside them understood hierarchy, even if they pretended not to believe in it anymore. He stopped beside the old man. For the first time since arriving, the old man's discipline cracked. Just slightly, not weakness, relief. He allowed himself to lean a fraction toward the officer, who immediately adjusted his stance to support him without drawing attention. A silent exchange, mutual respect. "You should have been seen hours ago," the officer said, voice low but firm. "That will be addressed." He turned toward the staff. "Who triaged him?" Silence. "Who authorized medication without full examination?" No answer. The officer's gaze swept the room, sharp and unforgiving. "This facility operates under civilian authority," he continued. "But neglect does not become acceptable just because the patient doesn't look important." The charge nurse swallowed hard and stepped forward. "Sir, if there was a misunderstanding..." "There was," the officer replied calmly. "And misunderstandings have consequences." He pulled out a folder, thicker, cleaner, unmistakably official. Inside were documents that never appeared in normal systems. Service records, medical authorizations, clearance levels. The kind of paperwork that didn't ask for cooperation. It expected it. A stretcher was ordered immediately. Not requested. Ordered. Doctors scrambled. Tests were rushed. Senior administrators appeared out of nowhere, suddenly apologetic, suddenly eager to help. The nurse who had mocked him earlier stood frozen, realizing every word she had spoken was now etched permanently into memory, hers and theirs. As the old man was gently moved, he turned his head once, eyes scanning the room that had judged him so quickly. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply said, "Next time, listen first." No one met his gaze. The hospital had corrected its behavior, but not its values, and everyone there knew something else was coming, because authority had arrived, and it hadn't finished speaking yet. What followed was not shouting, not punishment on the spot, not dramatic confrontation. It was worse. The emergency room sank into a silence so thick it felt physical. Conversations stopped, movements slowed, the kind of silence that forces people to replay their own behavior in their heads, frame by frame, without the comfort of excuses. The old man was taken in first, not because of his rank, not because of the uniforms now standing guard, but because, finally, Everyone understood he should have been all along. His condition was serious, time-sensitive. The medication he'd been given had masked symptoms that could have killed him if left untreated much longer. That truth settled heavily over the staff like a quiet indictment. No one said it out loud. They didn't need to. The nurse who had laughed earlier stood by the wall, arms crossed tightly around herself, eyes fixed on the floor. The security guard avoided everyone's gaze, suddenly aware of how easily authority can be borrowed and how brutally it can be revoked. The doctor stared at the screen, scrolling through test results with trembling fingers, realizing competence without humility was just another form of arrogance. Outside the treatment area, administrators whispered urgently. Policies were mentioned. Reviews. Reports. None of it. Erased what had already happened. The senior officer didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He simply said, "This man served a system that taught him discipline, restraint, and respect. Tonight, this system failed to return the favor." No one argued. Hours later, as the crisis stabilized, the old man was resting. Clean sheets, proper care, dignity restored, not by ceremony, but by necessity. When the officer prepared to leave, he paused at the doorway and looked back at the room one last time. "You didn't know who he was," he said, "and that's the point." Then he left. The staff remained where they were, changed, but not redeemed. Because redemption requires acknowledgement, and not everyone was ready for that. For the viewers watching this unfold, the lesson landed with satisfying weight. True authority doesn't announce itself. Honor doesn't demand applause. And the greatest mistakes are made when people decide someone's value by what they see instead of what they are. And as the room slowly returned to motion, one truth lingered in the air, impossible to ignore. Never underestimate someone because they look weak. If you stayed until the very end, you already understand something most people miss. Respect is revealed in moments like this. So now I want you to do 3 simple things that actually matter. First, subscribe to the channel. Stories like this aren't just entertainment. They're reminders of honor, discipline, and justice in a world that often forgets all. 3. Second, leave a comment with the words, "I will never judge by appearance," if you believe that real strength doesn't always look powerful at first glance. Your comment tells the algorithm, and other viewers, that this message matters. Third, hit the like button if you felt that moment when the room went silent, when arrogance collapsed and respect was restored. That reaction is exactly why these stories exist. And finally, don't stop here. Watch the next video appearing on your screen, right now, because it tells another unforgettable story where someone underestimated learns the truth the hard way.